Don't you want to marry me?
I'm going to marry Melanie.
But you can't, not if you care for me.
Oh, my dear, why must you make me say things that will hurt you? How can I make you understand?
Remember when a movie became Hollywood's biggest event before filming was even complete? In 1939, Gone with the Wind arrived as the most ambitious Civil War epic ever made, starring Vivien Leigh, Clark Gable, Olivia de Havilland, Hattie McDaniel, and Leslie Howard. But the drama wasn't limited to the screen. Behind the scenes were casting battles, production chaos, censorship fights, and historic moments that helped shape Hollywood history. Today, we're counting down 13 fascinating facts about Gone with the Wind. Be sure to stay until number 1, where a groundbreaking achievement came with a troubling reality. Number 13. They filmed the burning of Atlanta before casting Scarlett. Production began on December 10, 1938, with the spectacular Burning of Atlanta sequence, one of the largest and most expensive scenes in the entire movie. There was just one problem. Scarlett O'Hara hadn't been cast yet. Clark Gable had already signed on as Rhett Butler, but the lead actress remained unknown. As a result, one of the film's most important scenes was shot using a stand-in for Scarlett, while stuntman Yakima Canutt doubled for Gable. To create the massive fire, producer David O. Selznick ordered the destruction of decades-old studio sets, including structures originally built for earlier Hollywood productions. Flames soared hundreds of feet into the air, convincing many nearby residents that the studio was actually burning down. Despite the chaos, the carefully controlled operation produced one of cinema's most unforgettable sequences. The gamble paid off. The dramatic footage became one of the defining visual moments of the film and helped establish the epic scale Selznick envisioned. It's remarkable to think that one of Hollywood's most iconic scenes was completed before the actress playing its central character had even been chosen. What makes it even more striking is how much risk was involved in committing to such a massive shoot without a finalized lead. Most productions would never attempt something so uncertain, yet Selznick pushed forward anyway, trusting the process and the spectacle. That decision not only shaped the opening of the film, but also set the tone for everything that followed in its production. Number 12. The actress everyone said couldn't play Scarlett. Finding Scarlett O'Hara became one of Hollywood's biggest casting searches. More than 1,400 women were considered, and the hunt generated enormous publicity across the country. Meanwhile, Vivien Leigh had already decided the role belonged to her. Many believed a British actress could never convincingly portray a Southern belle, but Leigh wasn't discouraged. Through connections to Selznick's talent agency network, she made her way to Hollywood and patiently waited for the right opportunity. That moment came during the filming of the Burning of Atlanta sequence, when she was introduced to Selznick with the words, "I want you to meet your Scarlett O'Hara." Despite the doubts surrounding her nationality, Leigh ultimately delivered one of the most celebrated performances in film history. What makes the story even more interesting is how long the search actually dragged on behind the scenes. Producers auditioned Hollywood's biggest names, tested newcomers, and even brought in international actresses, hoping to find the perfect fit. The role became almost mythical, with public speculation turning it into a media obsession. Leigh's arrival didn't just solve a casting problem, it ended one of the most publicized talent searches in film history. In the end, she proved that determination and timing mattered just as much as industry expectations or nationality. Number 11. Katharine Hepburn never got her chance. Katharine Hepburn was convinced she was the perfect Scarlett O'Hara. Rather than auditioning, she actively campaigned for the role and even approached Selznick directly. Her confidence, however, wasn't enough to change his mind. Selznick worried about two things. First, Hepburn had recently been labeled box office poison after several disappointing films. Second, he didn't believe she possessed the romantic appeal he envisioned for Scarlett. Although Selznick offered her a screen test, Hepburn declined. She left without ever appearing on camera for the role and missed what might have been the biggest opportunity of her career. What makes this moment even more striking is how close she actually came to changing history. At the time, Hepburn was one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars, known for her sharp intelligence and strong screen presence. But the industry was shifting toward different expectations for leading actresses, and Selznick was under pressure to make a safe commercial choice. In hindsight, it's one of those casting what-if stories that film fans still debate today. Had she accepted the screen test, the entire legacy of Scarlett O'Hara might have looked very different. It also highlights how unpredictable Hollywood casting decisions can be, where reputation, timing, and studio politics often matter just as much as talent. Hepburn's rejection didn't just close a door for her, it reshaped one of cinema's most iconic roles and left behind a lingering sense of what might have been. Number 10. Clark Gable fought a scene that required tears. For years, Clark Gable had carefully maintained a tough on-screen image, which made one particular scene in Gone with the Wind a major problem. The script required Rhett Butler to show deep emotion after Scarlett's miscarriage, a subject the production code wouldn't even allow to be named directly. Gable strongly resisted the scene, refusing to cry on camera. Producer David O. Selznick, director Victor Fleming, and Olivia de Havilland all encouraged him to reconsider. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Two versions would be filmed, one emotional and one more restrained. After watching the footage, Gable admitted the emotional performance worked best. The scene remained in the film, and one of Hollywood's toughest stars discovered that vulnerability could be just as powerful as toughness. What's interesting is how unusual this was for Gable at the time. He had built his entire career on a confident, masculine persona, and audiences expected him to stay emotionally controlled in every role. Showing real grief felt risky, almost like breaking character in front of millions. But the people around him pushed because they knew the story needed that emotional weight. In the end, the decision didn't just improve the film, it also proved Gable could expand his range as an actor, adding depth to a role that might otherwise have felt one-dimensional. Number 9. A romantic scene sparked a censorship battle. One of the most famous moments in Gone with the Wind shows Rhett Butler sweeping Scarlett O'Hara into Hyesaltyn's arms and carrying her up a grand staircase before the screen fades to black. To audiences, it appeared romantic. To Joseph Breen of the Production Code Administration, it suggested something far more troubling. Breen repeatedly objected to the scene, arguing that it implied sexual violence, which was strictly forbidden under Hollywood's censorship rules. Selznick managed to keep the sequence by ensuring everything remained implied rather than shown. The fade to black gave the filmmakers just enough room to satisfy the censors while preserving the scene's intended meaning. The debate didn't end there. Viewers and critics have continued arguing about the scene's interpretation for decades, making it one of the most discussed moments in classic Hollywood history. What's especially notable is how carefully the filmmakers had to balance storytelling with strict censorship rules at the time. Every gesture, cut, and camera angle had to be calculated so the scene could pass approval while still carrying emotional weight. That tension between restriction and creativity ended up shaping how the moment was filmed, and it's a big reason it remains so iconic today. Number 8. Same movie, very different paychecks. Vivien Leigh was the star of Gone with the Wind in every sense of the word. She appeared in about 61% of the film and spent roughly 125 days on set. For all that work, she earned $25,000, about $200 a day. Clark Gable, meanwhile, appeared in around 30% of the movie and worked 71 days. His paycheck? A whopping $120,000, or nearly $1,700 a day. The difference wasn't exactly subtle. Gable was already Hollywood's biggest male star and a guaranteed box office draw. Selznick wanted him badly enough to pay top dollar. Leigh's situation was very different. Even after beating out hundreds of actresses for the role of Scarlett O'Hara, she was still viewed as a newcomer who had simply gotten a lucky break. That gave her very little bargaining power, and Selznick locked her into a restrictive 7-year contract. So while Leigh carried much of the film, Gable walked away with nearly 5 times the pay. In 1939, Hollywood, nobody considered that unusual. Looking back, it highlights just how different the studio system was compared to today. Actors were tightly controlled by long-term contracts, and salaries often reflected star power more than actual workload. Leigh's performance would later be recognized as iconic, but at the time, her paycheck reflected industry perception rather than her contribution to the film's success. Number 7. Nobody seemed to want this movie. It's funny looking back now, but several key people involved with Gone with the Wind weren't exactly excited about it. Leslie Howard, who played Ashley Wilkes, thought the character was dull and referred to him as a dreadful milksop. He only accepted the role after Selznick offered him incentives tied to another project he actually cared about. Once filming wrapped, Howard headed back to England and skipped the Atlanta premiere altogether. Clark Gable had his own doubts. He wasn't eager to play Rhett Butler because expectations were sky high, and he worried there was no way to satisfy everyone. In the end, one of the reasons he accepted the role was simple. He needed the money to finalize his divorce and marry Carole Lombard. Then there was author Margaret Mitchell. After selling the film rights, she kept her distance from the production and declined to help write the screenplay. When people asked who should play Rhett Butler, she jokingly suggested Groucho Marx. So before filming even started, one star didn't want the role, another was mainly there for practical reasons, and the author seemed content to stay out of the whole thing. Number 6. 3 directors, 16 writers, and total chaos. If Gone with the Wind feels like a miracle, that's because it kind of was. The screenplay passed through at least 16 writers during production. One of them was F. Scott Fitzgerald, who worked on the project but received no screen credit. At one point, things became so desperate that screenwriter Ben Hecht was brought in for an emergency rewrite. Legend has it, he rewrote huge portions of the script in less than a week while surviving on bananas and salted peanuts. Not exactly the writing retreat most people dream of. The directing situation wasn't much calmer. George Cukor spent years preparing the film, but was fired after only 18 days of shooting. Victor Fleming stepped in, only to become overwhelmed by the constant pressure and exhaustion. He eventually needed a 2-week break, forcing director Sam Wood to take over temporarily. By the end, the film had gone through multiple directors, dozens of script revisions, and enough behind-the-scenes drama to fill another movie. Somehow, it all came together. What's wild is that despite all this instability, the final film feels surprisingly cohesive. Most productions would collapse under that kind of turnover, but here it somehow fueled the scale and ambition instead. It's a rare case where chaos didn't derail the project. It defined it in the best possible way. Number 5. The most expensive gamble in Hollywood. Making Gone with the Wind wasn't just ambitious, it was incredibly expensive. The film cost around $3.85 million, making it one of the most costly productions ever attempted at the time. More than 2,400 people worked on it, and hundreds of thousands of feet of Technicolor film were used. That was a big deal, because Technicolor was still relatively new and incredibly expensive. In fact, there were only 7 Technicolor cameras available in the world, and Selznick rented every single one of them to film the burning of Atlanta sequence from multiple angles. The production even obsessed over small details. Margaret Mitchell had described Scarlett O'Hara's eyes as green, but Vivien Leigh's eyes were blue-gray. So the makeup team, camera crew, and lighting department worked together to create the illusion of green eyes on screen. Everything about the movie pushed technology, budgets, and patience to the limit. Selznick was betting millions that audiences would think it was worth it. Looking back, the gamble clearly paid off. The film became a massive box office success and went on to dominate awards season, proving that the risk wasn't just bold, it was historically effective. It also set a new standard for what Hollywood considered a big-budget production moving forward. Number 4. A movie premiere. So big, it shut down Atlanta. Movie premieres are usually glamorous. This one practically became a civic event. Gone with the Wind premiered in Atlanta on December 15th, 1939, and the celebration was so massive that Georgia Governor Urith D. Rivers declared it an official state holiday. Atlanta's mayor wasn't about to do things halfway either. The city organized a 3-day celebration featuring parades, parties, decorations, and special events inspired by the film's southern setting. The turnout was unbelievable. Around 300,000 people lined the streets to watch the cast arrive, while thousands more crowded around the theater on premiere night. What's even more impressive is that Atlanta's population at the time was roughly 300,000 people. In other words, it felt like the entire city, and then some, showed up. Long before worldwide opening weekends and social media hype, Gone with the Wind turned a movie premiere into one of the biggest public events America had ever seen. We're down to the final 3 facts, and they might be the most fascinating of the bunch. One involves a movie quote that became a source of comfort during some of the darkest years of the 20th century. Another shows that concerns about the film's racial portrayals existed long before modern audiences began debating them. And number 1 is both a historic Hollywood milestone and a reminder of how far the industry still had to go. Number 3, the last line became bigger than the movie. Gone with the Wind doesn't end with a happy reunion or a neat resolution. Instead, Scarlett O'Hara is left standing alone after losing almost everything. Then she delivers one final line. After all, tomorrow is another day. Believe it or not, that line was almost the title of the movie. Margaret Mitchell's publisher strongly preferred Tomorrow is Another Day, but Mitchell chose Gone with the Wind instead. She felt the title should focus on what had been lost, while the final line pointed toward hope and what might come next. The timing couldn't have been more powerful. The film, premiered after World War II, had already begun in Europe, and many audiences were still recovering from the hardships of the Great Depression. For viewers facing uncertainty, Scarlett's determination to keep going struck a chord. In Britain, where the film played continuously in London during the Blitz, audiences watched a character rebuild her life while bombs were falling on their own cities. What started as a movie quote became something much more meaningful to people living through difficult times. Number 2. People were raising concerns before the movie even opened. Discussions about Gone with the Wind's portrayal of race didn't begin decades later. They started before the film was even released. The NAACP warned producer David O. Selznick that the story risked romanticizing the Confederacy and presenting a softened version of slavery. Newspapers such as the Pittsburgh Courier also criticized racial language used in the script and called for changes. To his credit, Selznick did make some revisions. References to the Ku Klux Klan were removed, and certain racial slurs were cut. He also hired advisors to review aspects of the film's portrayal of black characters. But many critics felt those changes only addressed the surface issues, while the broader themes remained untouched. The debate never really disappeared. More than 80 years later, the same questions about the film's historical portrayal continue to spark discussion, showing just how complicated its legacy remains. What's important to note is that these reactions weren't coming from hindsight, but from people observing the production in real time. The concerns reflected a growing awareness of how Hollywood shaped public perception. Even at the height of anticipation for the film, there was already a clear divide between celebration of its scale and criticism of its message, a tension that still defines how it's discussed today. Number 1. A historic Oscar win overshadowed by segregation. On February the 29th, 1940, Hattie McDaniel made history by becoming the first African-American performer to win an Academy Award. Her Best Supporting Actress win for playing Mammy was a groundbreaking achievement and remains one of the most important moments in Oscar history. Unfortunately, the circumstances surrounding that night told a very different story. The ceremony was held at the Coconut Grove nightclub in Los Angeles, a venue that did not normally admit black guests. Selznick reportedly had to call in a personal favor just to ensure McDaniel could attend. Even then, she wasn't seated with her Gone with the Wind co-stars. While Vivien Leigh, Clark Gable, and Olivia de Havilland sat near the stage, McDaniel was placed at a separate table away from the rest of the cast. When her name was announced, she walked to the stage and delivered a gracious acceptance speech that has become one of the most memorable in Academy Awards history. But the evening didn't end there. After the ceremony, many cast members attended celebrations at venues that also excluded black guests, meaning McDaniel couldn't join them. So one of Hollywood's proudest milestones was accompanied by one of its most uncomfortable contradictions. Hattie McDaniel broke a barrier that night, but the treatment she received made it painfully clear that true equality was still a long way off. And there you have it, 13 fascinating facts about Gone with the Wind. Which one surprised you the most? Let us know, and if you enjoyed this trip back into classic Hollywood history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with another movie fan.